Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and the other host is Chris. What's up, buddy?
Hello, Zach, my dear friend. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us around the world and around all of the countries and the interwebs. 39 countries, I think. Some
No,
close to
no,
like,
it's more than that, Chris. We're like
oh,
46
wow.
now. 46, I think it is.
Oh, that's incredible. That's awesome. We really appreciate everyone watching us and joining and just participating in like all the stuff we love to talk to. It's great. How have you been, my great friend?
I've been good, busy, with my son playing Little League.
Ah,
It's that time of the year where we're at practice 3 to 4 times a week, and then games start next month in April at the time of this recording, and it's been busy. It's been real busy. How about you?
yeah, it's been good. I've been busy. Work is always keeping me busy, and I'm traveling with that. And then we're getting a little bit warmer in the northern hemisphere up here in the Arctic, so we got to go do some great, enjoyable hiking today out um, for several miles. So that was wonderful. So I'm liking that a lot. It's nice to see some more sunshine coming up here.
Yeah, we had some days in the low 70s here, which was
Oh
fantastic.
yeah.
And then it was like, haha, just kidding. And last night we had a massive thunderstorm, lightning, hail, like it was wild.
Wow. You get the variety there. Complete
It's
variety.
yeah, it doesn't know what it wants to do here, that's for sure. It's
Yeah.
very interesting, much different than California where it was very consistent weather, like sunny and 65, sunny and 70. Like I would never ever get sick of sunshine. There's literally not a day I'm like, I wish it wasn't sunny today. I wish it was crappy outside or cold. I
Yeah.
didn't wish that at all.
Yeah, totally,
So
man.
much different. Yeah.
Wow.
But we are here today for the second episode of our newest Spotlight series, looking at the Section 31 focused episodes, eventually culminating in
Mhm.
the Section 31 movie, which that in and of itself is going to be wild.
It is going to be wild. This was so cool to watch this second like episode of Section 31 centric activities. It had been such a while since I saw this DS9 episode. It was like I was watching it fresh, completely fresh.
Mm.
And I loved it. I loved this one. I thought it was great. As you know, I texted you. And of course, it's DS9, so you're gonna say, yeah, of course you love it. So, but it was,
I remember you texted me and you're like, this is so good. I was like, well, of course it's so good. It's DS9. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
yeah,
Um,
no, it is. It's a great episode, and we look forward to sharing our thoughts with you and working our way through this and discussing the second part of the Section 31 Spotlight series that we're doing. If it's your first time watching us, welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. We're a couple of nerdy guys who like to talk about all things nerdy, Star Trek to Star Wars and everything in between.
mhm.
Be sure to go on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube. If you're a podcast platform, you can find us there and follow us, subscribe, and do all that fun jazz that people do on the interwebs and on the socials, as the kids say these days. Uh, but yeah, we are working our way through Section 31, and the last episode we did, Chris, of course, was the very first episode that aired, featuring Section 31 and a brand new character that we had never met before in the Trek universe. Before that, named Sloan.
That's right. And as I watched this episode and I got to see more and more of Sloan, I liked him even more than I did on the first episode. Particularly
Ah,
yeah, like at the end, you know, there's a just a very personal interaction between Sloan and Bashir that we'll talk about, but um I really liked Sloan. And he's like the person like everyone can easily dislike, right? He's part of Section 31, this covert kind of agency, and it's just he's easily someone to misunderstand, easily someone to put all the blame on, like easily like someone that people can dislike. So thinking through that um, and how he's played by the excellent actor, I just really grew to like Sloan even more.
yeah, he's a very interesting character, very
Hmm.
complex, and 2 episodes into the Section 31 Spotlight series, we've only seen what 3 people that you would consider maybe Section 31 agents, right? Sloan and those 2 other guys that I don't even have speaking lines in the first
Yeah.
episode we discussed. Uh, this episode is very different. In fact, the only Section 31 identified agent that we see in it is indeed Sloan.
Yeah, it is indeed just him. Um, and we'll like as we watch the other Section 31 episodes, particularly for DS9, it'll be interesting to see if there are any other agents or contemporary agents around Sloan while he's part of Section 31. I don't remember off the top of my mind, so it'll be good to kind of to see it and kind of watch through. Um, but like some of the things that Sloan says to Bashir, I really like because he really plays to what Bashir likes, right? He says, "Yeah, I know, like you like mystery, you like puzzles, you like intrigue. Um, I know you like all these things. Do you want to know what I know?" So I like that. I really like that about Sloan. He knows Bashir really, really, really well and is relying on how well he knows Bashir and is relying on Bashir to be true to himself, like that which we saw at the end of the episode, um, which was actually, I think, kind of great that happened. So it was really, 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 really neat. As this episode kind of opened up, um, I realized that, oh, this is after in the pale moonlight, and
Correct.
and now the Romulans are allied with the Federation and the Klingon Empire. So that was pretty cool. It made this episode have a lot of maybe like political intrigue to it.
Hmm.
Um, and we got to open up like with some kind of an administration meeting between like Kira and Worf and the Klingons, like and the Romulans, which was pretty neat to see. I think um, how they behaved, so that was kind of neat to see and how Kira handled it.
Yeah, we've learned so far through these first two Section 31 centric episodes that Sloan is nothing if not manipulative, right? He knows exactly what strings to pull on when it comes to Bashir. He knows what things to focus on in order to rile Bashir up or to get him involved because he knows the things that Bashir cares about. I mean, he's obviously done his homework. It's
Mhm.
very obvious that Section 31 is very keen on learning about its targets or about its recruits, so much so that they think they might know them better than the actual person themselves, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, let's jump into this, Chris. We are here with Star Trek Deep Space Nine's Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis, if I'm saying that exactly correct, written by Ron D. Moore and directed by none other than the amazing David Livingston.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. So when I saw that it was written by Ron D. Moore, I thought, oh, this is very interesting. And so as I watched this episode, I was thinking about Ron D. Moore. I was also thinking about Battlestar Galactica.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I went through, I felt like, hey, this episode to me had this very similar kind of feel to actually Battlestar Galactica. Um, in part, the themes of this episode, like Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis, as explained later in the episode by Admiral Ross. No, actually, that's what Admiral Ross says, and Bashir like explains it for the audience and says, "Hey, in times of war, um, the laws stay silent." I may not be translating it exactly right. It was something like that, paraphrased. Um, but I thought, oh, that was pretty great because this is very much an episode and a story of two different sides of morality and continuing the theme that we talked about in the first Section 31 episode, where it was, hey, do the ends justify the means?
Mm.
Right. And and Sloan acknowledges like that in a conversation that Sloan has directly with Bashir when they're on the Bellerophon and getting ready to go to the medical conference. Which, by the way, the medical conference is like never medical
Here,
conference is just like it's
here
bad
we
things
go
happen.
again.
Yeah,
Here we go again with the
it's
medical
another medical
conference.
conference.
Every time Bashir's involved in a medical conference, something happens, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Never
it's
ceases to amaze me.
I know.
This is a very interesting episode. So I remember you texted me earlier this
Yeah,
morning, the time of this recording, earlier today, and you mentioned to me about that you felt like this episode had a BSG feel to it,
yeah,
which would make sense given the writer is Ron Moore. And so I was like, okay, well, I had never approached this episode with that in mind. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
when I watch this, let me think about that the way you were thinking about it and see if I notice anything.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I definitely did. I mean, I did it completely remind me of BSG? No, but there were definitely elements of this that I was like, okay, this definitely has some BSG flavor to it, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
the big part of it is the draw of the political aspect, right? With the Federation and the Romulans, the idea of the Romulan Senate and treachery and spying and everything else. You saw a lot of that when it came to the politics on BSG,
Mm-hmm.
which would make sense, right? Because Ron Moore got his start writing on Star Trek, and he brought what he learned writing on Star Trek into Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. For me, it was a lot about exploring the right thing and what is the right thing and what is the right thing from someone's perspective. And Admiral Ross, like at the end of the episode where he's having a one-on-one with Bashir at the end of the episode,
Mm-hmm.
Bashir has come to realize and has realized at the end that, oh, um, Sloan wasn't actually killed. Sloan is alive, and this whole thing was a setup. And he goes to Admiral Ross. And Bashir's like he's brilliant, right? He's super intelligent. He's genetically enhanced. Um, but Admiral Ross says some things to Bashir that, really reminded me like maybe about like the sense or the feel of BSG. Like Admiral Ross kind of acknowledges that, hey, those principles of the Federation. Uh, uh, yeah. So Bashir says, "Hey, all the young officers are going and they're sacrificing themselves um, to uphold the principles of the Federation. And so, what you're doing is now their sacrifices don't mean anything." And Admiral Ross has said something to the effect like, "Yeah, I've had to send all of those guys to sacrifice themselves, and I don't want to do it anymore.
Mm.
I can't do it anymore."
Remind you of
Right?
the Cage with
Yeah.
Captain Pike saying similar
Hmm.
thing, not wanting to have
Yeah.
to choose who lives and who dies.
Yeah. And so it's Admiral Ross, like not, he's kind of accepting the idea of Section 31 and the idea of bending that morality so that he wouldn't have to sacrifice like all those people. So it's the Admiral Ross has like taken and twisted that morality of that particular decision and action. So it really reminded me about the presidential election in BSG.
Ah,
So
good point.
just taking those kind of themes like out there, right? And then in BSG was Admiral Adama and the president, and then Admiral Adama, I mean, we all know Baltar was this horrible thing, right? It
Yeah,
was horrible, but Admiral Adama was like, well, I guess we got to do the right thing now, and we got to say that the election was was rigged, right? And so he does the right thing for that action. So
yeah,
this is what I liked, from this episode.
it was, and I love the way this episode starts. Right,
Mhm.
you have this intro where they're in the wardroom and Kira's presiding over this meeting, and you have the Romulan Senator Kretak, you have Worf, O'Brien, and Odo, and there's arguing about how Senator Kretak very much believes that the Klingons and other Federation ships are taking priority, especially Klingons, over repairs and so forth. And I love what Kira says to Worf when she's like, "Well, Worf, it's going to be your job to go tell General Martok that his flagship's being bumped from priority." And Worf kind of has this, this like little kind of scowl on his face or whatever. And I thought that was really hilarious. Very kind of
Mhm.
a lighthearted, funny way of starting this episode out. And really, what this wardroom scene does at the beginning is it captures the feel of the episode to a certain extent, but it also reminds us as we're jumping into an episode rather than going episode by episode, like how DS9 really is meant to be
Mhm.
watched. Uh, and the fact, I mean, we're in season 7, right? We're a good ways into season 7. The Dominion War is just booming right now. things aren't necessarily going the best, and they're struggling in order to keep up and try and hold the Dominion and the Jem'Hadar at bay. And
Hmm.
so this is a good reminder of where we are at in the timeline. We're in the thick of the Dominion War. Things aren't the greatest, and you have people and you have races who are not normally aligned with each other. The Klingons and Romulans are never aligned with each other. Federation and Romulan aren't really aligned. The Klingons and Federation are, back and forth. So it's a good reminder that, hey, while all of this is going on, we got a war going on too. And that's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a sense of urgency, maybe a little bit of like desperation, like that's around. Um, but also that they are tentatively and uncomfortably allied with each other, and they're getting used to working with each other, right? There's just like this new relationship that's very strained. Not long ago, the Federation and the Klingon Empire was at odds with each other. Now they're allied. And
Well, this
the
week, anyways.
Yeah, this week there.
I mean, think about it, Chris. How many times in DS9 did the Federation and Klingons go back and forth? I mean, it's countless times,
Yeah.
right? They're enemies, now they're friends, and they're enemies, and they're friends, and so it's a very much a back and forth for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it is very much a back and forth. So we're reminded of this tentative, unsteady alliance that exists, right? And then what I also like about this episode is there's a lot of reference to the covert agencies amongst each organization. The Tal Shiar, Starfleet Intelligence, um, Section 31, the Obsidian Order. We've got this great scene with Garrick, um, and Bashir, and I think Garrick is explaining his experience of visiting Romulus, right?
Yeah.
Garrick's kind of perception and experience, and Garrick's like, oh man, everything's like really gray.
Yeah.
And
If only Garrett could visit the new Trek and go, everything's so glossy.
oh yeah, everything's so glossy. And then and the Romulan's heart itself like is gray, and it's just kind of neat seeing that there's these ties between all of the covert kind of organizations within each like empire, which was neat to see. I
Yeah.
think all of them were mentioned, except Klingons. I don't know if the Klingons have a.
They don't. They don't.
They
They
don't,
don't
right?
have a. I mean, you have. It's not a secret group or organization. The only thing I can even remotely closely equate for the Klingons would be like the Order of the Batleth. But even the
Hmm.
Order of the Batleth is just people who have, they're Klingons who have done great deeds in battle and are awarded that Order of the Batleth. In fact, we see that in the DS9 episode. I believe that's what it's referencing, um, or what I'm referencing is the DS9 episode where Odo and O'Brien and Captain Cisco all dress up as Klingons, and they're going
Yeah.
into to try and basically put these little devices so that it reveals that Gowron is a changeling, when
Yeah.
actual fact it's General Martok. And I want to say they're there for something to do with the Order of the Batleth. But again, it's not.
Yeah.
It's still not anywhere near the same as the Tal Shiar, the Obsidian Order, or Section 31. It's just the closest thing I could possibly think of, because it's not some rogue group or some super group. It's just Klingons who have been given this award. Because
And
really, the Klingons don't have anything like this.
yeah, and it actually makes sense to me that the Klingons would not have something like that, like a covert like operations, because they're all about honor and going into
Correct.
battle and like
Yeah.
straight, like it is very much like they are straightforward and in your face. Like
Yeah.
so they don't need any like covert stuff.
And you're right on that, because if the Klingons did have something like that, it would be contrary to everything in which their society is founded upon, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, in fact, there is some back and forth with Senator Kretak and Worf at the beginning, where she's insulting the Klingons and how they're not professional and they need, they're a bunch of, whatever. I can't remember the exact words, but when you hear that, you say, okay, it makes sense because in fact, it was something to do with the ships, right? Where the ships needed to be Worf's like the reason why the Klingons ships need to be repaired is because they go into battle with honor and don't sit back and blah 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 and yeah.
Yes.
So it's something like that. That exchange between Worf and Senator Kretak, I think, is a good reminder as to why the Klingons wouldn't have something like what the Romulans do.
Agree completely. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but the little scene there with Bashir and Garrick is hilarious, and it's very reminiscent of many of their conversations throughout the show, right? And this is season 7, so this is very late in the show, last season, and they've had many conversations about the way in which the universe works,
Yeah.
and the fact that Garrick is nothing more than a simple tailor, and all of these things, and Bashir is, especially at the beginning of DS9, is very what's the word I'm looking for? Innocent's not the right word. He's very, I guess,
Naive.
naive. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the right word. He's very
Yeah.
naive. And Garrick knows things work differently than the way Bashir sees them. And as a matter of fact, I believe that's even mentioned again in this particular exchange between the two.
You know, your description of Bashir, I think, is right on. Like him being a naive, because there were some things I felt like in this episode that Bashir does that it's like, I think, why would you do that? Like, like why would you do that? So Bashir is so this is at the point where they're at the conference, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around a lot, but this just came to my mind because he's specifically talking about like Bashir's kind of personality
Is this
and
between
how he's
him
react.
and the scene between him and Sloan?
This is actually like between Bashir and Senator Kretak.
Yeah. Oh, okay. When he comes to her in confidence, trying to say, "Hey, we got to stop this assassination on
Yes.
uh, Kovac. What's his name? Kovar.
Koval. Yeah.
Koval.
Koval. Koval. Yeah. So
I
what
should know that.
yeah. What Bashir knows at that point, what Bashir knows is that like, hey, he's just supposed to be like doing some recon right now. Um, yeah, he kind of knows that Section 31 doesn't like Koval. Um, and this is kind of all of a front because all actually this isn't none of this is true, but from his understanding, Section 31 doesn't like Koval, doesn't want Koval to sit on the continuing committee of Romulus.
Hmm.
Um, but at the moment, Bashir is not allowed. He can't contact DS9. He can't contact the Admiral. And so it's just him right now. But Bashir like takes it upon himself to go, well, I think I'm gonna go like confide in Senator like Kretak and tell her everything. He tells her everything,
Yeah.
right? And he tells her, hey, there's this organization called Section 31, and this is I thought, wow, okay, Bashir, you just went in and like told her everything. So I thought that was pretty naive, like of him to do that.
Yeah. It really is. That being said, there's a moment in the exchange between Garrick and Bashir that I find important for the rest of this episode, and it's telling of who Bashir is as a character that we've gotten to know throughout the DS9 series.
Mhm.
And that is where Garrick calls Bashir the ever eternal optimist. And he says that he hopes Bashir will come to see the universe for what it truly is, as opposed to what he would like it to be. And I think that's an important thing, right? Because Bashir does look at the universe in a much different way in which Garrick does. I mean, Garrick was part of the Obsidian Order, right? I mean,
Mhm.
he this is a big deal here. And so Dr. Bashir's experiences are much different. And the doctor says that he will endeavor to become more cynical with every passing day. And Garrick says, if only you meant it, with a grin on his face. I think the friendship and the exchanges that Bashir and Garrick have throughout the series are very um, memorable and certainly one of the better friendships in DS9. But that's an important thing to note here because that tells us the type of character that Bashir has been, and it propels us moving forward.
It does. I'm so glad you talked about this because I think this interaction between Garrick and Bashir is directly parallel to the final interaction between Sloan and Bashir in Bashir's quarters at the end of the
Yes,
episode, right? So
100%. Yep.
so this is where you know, we thought Sloan had died. He's not really dead, but Sloan comes back into Bashir's quarter, wakes up like Bashir again. So he's always in there like when Bashir is sleeping or something.
Yeah, because right after this scene with him and Garrick, he wakes up in later in the evening, and Sloane's in his room,
Yeah.
sitting there, right? And then I think this is where Bashir says something to the effect of, "Well, color me surprised or whatever, and don't expect what are you expecting, a welcoming party or some kind of fanfare or whatever?" And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. But near the end of the episode, um, is interesting because Sloan is explaining to Bashir. Sloan says, "I was relying on you to be a good man." Is something to that effect. I was relying on you to be you, and you always do the right thing.
yep.
And because, like Garrick said, he's the eternal optimist. Bashir wants to do the right thing, so he's like, "I was relying you to do the right thing," and like Bashir, says something snide to Sloan, oh, okay, but Sloan says, "I do what I have to do to protect men like you," and Bashir's like says something also kind of snide to Sloan. But after that, I really like some of Sloane's final words, and I really think he meant this. Sloan, like he stands up and he says, "It's an honor to know you, Doctor." Like, and he leaves like after. And so I really felt like, yeah, you know, Sloan, he's got to do all of this morally ambiguous decisions and actions to protect men like Bashir and to protect the Federation because at this moment in time, um, not not everyone in the quadrant in the galaxy behaves with the same principles that the Federation does. So he's got to do something to protect that. So I thought that was really cool and parallel, right? Parallel to that conversation with Garrick and Bashir. Oh, I love how this episode is written. I really do.
I mean, it's written by Ron Moore, right? So
Yeah.
we would expect nothing less than brilliance from the writing. That line you mentioned where Sloan says, the Federation needs men like you, Doctor, men of conscience, men of
Ah,
principle, men who can
yeah.
sleep at night. And so that's interesting because that's telling you more into the psyche and more about this character that we've only met once prior to this episode, right? We met
Yeah.
him in the last episode of Section 31 from season 6 of DS9. What people I think need to realize if you're watching or listening to us, Section 31 did not come into Star Trek until DS9, and it came into DS9 very late. We're talking, a pretty good ways into season 6. And a matter of fact, in production order, I believe, the first uh, the first Section 31 episode where Section 31 makes its first appearance in Star Trek, which is the one we just talked about recently, the episode Inquisition, is the episode right before In the Pale Moonlight,
Hmm.
which is a very obviously popular, very well-known episode of Star Trek and
Yeah.
DS9, and arguably one of the best episodes of Star Trek of all time. And so that's important that this is not coming in until late in the series. And we've had all of this buildup of Bashir prior to this. And we've seen so many characters with the types of principles and values and morals that align with the Federation, like you said. Then all of a sudden, something turns and we get a new character. This character of Sloan representing us a very secretive agency, although it seems like now the agency is way out in the open.
Yeah. Yeah, it
uh,
does.
yeah. And so we're getting something very different here. where this character is saying, we need men of conscience, principle, and men who can sleep at night. That tells me that Sloan is none of those things. Because if he was those things, why would he say that we need men like you? He's not saying we need more men like you. He's hinting that we need men like you. We need people like you.
Yeah.
That tells me that he doesn't consider himself one of these things. And we'll learn in a future episode that we discuss with Sloan in it, where they go into his mind. And there's a lot of discussions about stuff like this with his character. We learn a lot about his character in that episode.
Yeah, we do.
So I find that very fascinating as we're continuing to learn more about the Section 31 here in just the second episode, that this secret agency in the Federation is discussed and brought forward. But also we're learning more about the character of Sloan and Bashir too.
Yeah. This makes me wish for complete episode centric or centric episodes about Sloan. That would be great to learn about Sloan more, right? Because I believe he fully realizes the value of people like Bashir, um, and that the Federation like needs people like Bashir, and he takes it's like he's the shadow of the Federation. He's the shadow of principled people, right? He's where all the ambiguous stuff, all of the negative stuff like comes to land in this kind of shadow figure, and he's willing to accept it, like and to do it.
Yeah.
So I find that like really interesting, really compelling. Um, and just knowing where his origins are, like where he came from and how he came to be there.
Yes, there's also a scene where Sloan meets up with Bashir
Mm-hmm.
on board the
Bellerophon?
ship, the
Yeah.
Bellerophon, as it is headed towards Romulus. And I love this moment because Sloan even says to him, uh, Doctor, spare me the you know, what did he say? Something like spare
Yeah.
me this, that, or the other, right? And I'll spare you the ends justify the means,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that is directly referencing, I think, back to the episode Inquisition, right? Because he talks about how the just ends justifying the means. And so again, we're learning more about Sloan and Bashir and how vastly different these two characters are, how vastly different these two view the way in which they solve certain things.
Yeah. And I like that kind of that stage where they're just putting these very, very opposite figures like in there. I almost wish we could have had a scenario um where you would have had Sloan and Picard in the same
Oh
like
gosh.
episode, right? Like we were talking about that spectrum, like they're very, very, very far apart.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be
Oh,
that'd
here's
be
a
pretty
quote. I
interesting.
found it,
Yeah,
Chris. Let me read the quote
yeah,
to you. So Luther Sloan is saying, "Let's make a deal, Doctor. I'll spare you the ends justify the means speech, and you spare me the we must do what's right speech. You and I are not going to see eye to eye on this subject, so I suggest we stop discussing it." I think that was also an important interaction between the two of them,
I do.
right? Because Sloan is like, "Hey, let's get over the fact that we are seeing things very differently. Let's just get after the task at hand."
Yeah, yeah, because Sloane's got a mission, right? And they've got to get it done.
Yep.
It was
Yeah, and
great.
he sees Bashir, like he even tells Bashir, like you're purely doing reconnaissance, right? You're gonna look at Koval. You're gonna, I guess, what he believes can give some sort of diagnosis or some sort of insight into what potentially Koval has,
Hmm.
which is a syndrome that typically only affects Romulans, Vulcans, and then there's one other species, right? But it's a neurological disorder, I believe.
Klingons too? Maybe,
No, it's
maybe.
not Klingons. I don't remember what
It
the
was
name
someone
of the
else. Yeah,
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 some other species, but this isn't the first time we've heard of this was it uh, that's not Tuvok syndrome. That sounds like Tuvok from Voyager. It
I
starts with a T though, right?
think it did start with a T.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So Sloan doesn't need Bashir to do anything other than to just provide information, right? Like, hey, I was able to, talk with Koval, and this is what I think. This is what he looks like. These are the any symptoms he might notice, anything like that. Because the cover story, right? I'll use air quotes here. The cover
Hmm.
story is that Koval is the one that they need to take out. They don't want the director of the Tal Shiar rising up to a significant Tuvon syndrome. That's the name of it. I was close. I
Tuvok.
said Tuvok.
Oh, it's
Tuvon
close. Yeah.
syndrome. Yeah, Tuvon syndrome. They don't want the head of the Tal Shiar rising up into this higher political position within the Romulan Empire.
Yeah, you're right. And so it makes at the time in the episode, right, that makes sense. So like, oh yeah, you don't want this, you don't want the head of the Tal Shiar doing this.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be good for the Alliance, it's not gonna be good for the Federation. But little did we know that, hey, that was all like a setup, like anyways. And so they didn't want Kretok to be up there, Senator Kretok to be there, which I thought was such a cool like 180
The
because
twist.
yeah, twist because because we meet Senator Kretok at the big or we might have met her before this episode. I don't recall, but she's at the beginning and she's likable.
Yeah,
Like, right?
yeah, she is. I believe we do meet her before this episode.
Yeah.
Because she's a Romulan representative on DS9 to a
Mhm.
certain point. I'm pretty sure we meet her before this. But yes, you're right. They make her out to be a very likable character. Some you're like,
No.
okay, she's Romulan, but I can get behind this idea of her and what her character represents and so forth. And then they pretty much use her as bait and hang her out to dry.
Yeah. And it was interesting because like in the conversation near the end of the episode where it's just Bashir and Admiral Ross one on one, right? And
Yeah.
Bashir's like, "Oh, well, wouldn't you rather have had like Senator Kretok on the Continuum Committee?" And then you hear Admiral Ross go, "No, because she's a patriot and she puts Romulus first. Romulus first. That means if Romulus had an opportunity to seek another alliance with someone that would better Romulus, she's gonna go for it." And so Admiral Ross is saying, "No." And I thought, oh, well, that was an interesting twist to the entire thing, like as well. I thought it was
Yeah.
cool.
Which would make sense, right?
Yeah.
Because they didn't, I think the biggest fear is they didn't want the Romulans deciding to change course and be aligned with the Dominion. That would
Yeah.
have massive ramifications for the quadrant. That would be no bueno for sure.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it would be bad, very, very bad. And so
Hmm.
I think there's some serious concern there. But what they do is you see, and of course, we learn too that Admiral Ross is kind of sort of involved in this as well. I wouldn't
Hmm.
say he's not working for Section 31, I don't think. But they also leave some ambiguity there where maybe he could kind of be working for Section 31, but he's also a fairly high up admiral. So maybe it's one of those things where he's kind of just sitting back and allowing Section 31 to do their deeds because he knows that at the end of the day, Section 31, whether he likes their means or not, is doing things in favor of, ensuring that the threats to the Federation are taken care of.
Yeah. And Ross knew enough about Section 31's operation. Like he knew that the plan was that Sloan was supposed to be beamed away like moments before the phaser blast hit him. He he knew that Koval was the Federation's mole, and this whole thing was like to support Koval, and then remove someone, Senator Kretok, like before she could be on the continuing committee. Um, so he knew like enough about kind of what was going on, to make it interesting, but had kind of some plausible deniability like in there as well. He's like, I don't really know if Sloan was alive or dead or if everything like worked. I know that this was like the plan, but who knows if he's actually alive. Um,
And he just happened to have an aneurysm at just the right
that's
time. And
right.
I think that's where that whole thing that Bashir overhears in the mess hall, he hears, something's happened to Admiral Ross, and then he goes and sees Admiral Ross and everything. And that's, I think, the kicker. That was the thing that I think gave it away for Bashir, right? Because he
Yeah.
realizes, well, hang on a second. He just so happens to for this to happen at
Yeah.
just the right time. There's some many things here that are not just coincidence.
Some
It's
shady
it's
shady things
interesting.
going on there.
Yeah. So did you notice or did you pick up on this very common overlap between Inquisition and Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis, which is certainly one of the longer, harder episode names to say, where in Inquisition and in this episode both, you see Bashir being fooled, quote unquote, and then he begins to put the pieces together and solves what has gone on unbeknownst to him throughout the
Yeah.
majority of the episode. I find that very fascinating that, you know, I look at Bashir right now through these first two Section 31 episodes. He's a pawn who's being used by Sloan in Section 31 for them to accomplish their missions. Because you remember
Yeah. Yeah.
when Sloan first shows up in his quarters, he says, I don't work for you, Sloan. And then Bashir has that discussion with Cisco. And Cisco tells him, hey, you need to go basically be a mole in Section 31, right?
Yeah.
And you need to play along as though you are working for Sloan and so forth. And so Bashir, even though Bashir is quote unquote being the mole in Section 31, he's still being played by Sloan and Admiral Ross to a certain extent in Section 31, like he was being played in Inquisition.
Yeah. And we could go deep on the conspiracy theories because Cisco tells Bashir to accept the assignment with Sloan. So you could say, well, Cisco's kind of supporting Section 31, like in that aspect of it too. Obviously, Admiral Ross is as well. And so they're
Yeah.
they're they're doing that for
Do
they're
you
having
remember?
Bashir
Yeah. Do you
accept
remember that
it.
episode of DS9 where Keiko comes home from Bajor and she's not acting like herself, and O'Brien's so confused and everybody seems so off, and at the end of the episode you realize he's actually a clone
Yeah.
of the real Bashir
Yeah.
or of the real O'Brien,
Yeah.
and it that there's that whole it's almost like a giant conspiracy on against O'Brien. You're thinking through the whole episode. There's some conspiracy going on board DS9. He's trying to contact Starfleet. Nothing's working. He doesn't realize that he's not the real O'Brien. And it kind of reminds me of that episode, this idea of this whole conspiracy, like you said, and everything seems to be working against Bashir. But at the end of Inquisition, Cisco tells Bashir that the next time he asks, you need to go work for him. And I know there's a little bit of time gap between these two episodes, but like, did they forget? Did Bashir forget? Like, the next time Sloan approaches him, or if he does, then he needs to go work for him?
That's right. And this is after to go even deeper on the conspiracy theories. This is after Bashir has already been revealed as a genetically enhanced uh like officer like human. So they're
Yeah.
like, well, what can we get Bashir to do? You got we've got him here. He's a genetically enhanced Starfleet officer. What we can have him? What
Yeah.
can we have him do? Um, like it, one of the early interactions between Sloan and Bashir, I think when Sloan was uh he's in Bashir's quarters and he's saying, "Hey, I have an assignment for you." It's I liked it because Bashir says something to Sloan like, "You're already thinking like past the war, aren't you?" You're like you're thinking what's going to happen past the war. You're not even thinking about the alliance anymore. And Sloan was kind of acknowledged that, like, yeah, I've got to think past all of this and what's going to happen with the Federation
Yeah.
after
He's
we're
thinking of
done.
what the next war is going to be, right?
Yeah, he's thinking about what the
Yeah.
next one. Yeah, exactly. And I thought that was important because someone has to. And I guess Sloan was like is in the correct position to be thinking about that, thinking two, three steps ahead, like on where do they need to go, where do they need to be positioned. So I
That's a,
did really like that.
that's a good point. And it makes sense because if Section 31 and someone like Sloan were so slow, so solely focused on what's right in front of them, they would not see the big picture. They would not
Yeah.
potentially see threats coming towards the Federation. And really, Sloan and this idea of Section 31 in these first two episodes has been made up of the idea that it's this protection against threats from the Federation, which means they have to look really, really big picture, right? They have to constantly be thinking about what's coming next, what's going to happen, and anticipating things so that they're not surprised. Because if they're surprised, then the threat's already there, and now they're not doing what they think they should be doing.
Yeah, that was a perfect like analysis right there. I do really like that about Section 31 and Sloan that they have to think like far in the future, like you said, on onto the different
Yeah.
threats. Yeah.
I did think it was cool that they brought back something that Bashir was very intimately involved with in a previous episode, and that was the virus, the quickening. The episode in which Bashir
Mhm.
is on that planet and he sees firsthand what the quickening does and
That's right.
how brutal of a disease it is, right? So everybody in that, I don't remember the species, but everybody is born with the quickening virus in them, right? And then it's literally just a matter of time for when the quickening basically explodes and it starts taking over their bodies and it's dormant and then it activates, right? Or something along those lines. I may not be using the exact terms, but I remember that episode very vividly. Seen it many times,
Hmm.
and it's a very difficult episode to watch. I mean, this idea that this species, the babies are born with this virus. Everybody's born with it. They have no way of not being born with it. There's no cure. And it's so deadly and it's so ravaging to this society that they're just in ruins, basically.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they do everything they can to slow the progress of the quickening once it activates, and they just don't know when it's going to happen to each person. So I find it interesting. And then, of course, there's some level of PTSD I think that Bashir gets from
Oh, yeah.
treating those people, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that they bring that quickening virus back in, the fact that Koval, the head of the Tal Shiar, is interested in the virus and interested in knowing how to release it into a population is scary. And I think even Sloan says something to the effect of, well, of course, why wouldn't the head of the Tal Shiar be interested in a bioweapon?
Yeah, you're right. It made sense because doesn't Sloan say something to be sure, like, look who's in the room? Like, of course, like they're all gonna want to do that.
Koval
Um,
was front and center for his
mhm.
lecture on the quickening
Yeah.
virus.
Yeah, and here is, Bashir at this conference delivering a lecture on the virus and like how to heal how to cure and how to heal the people. But, you know, that's not what they're going to be interested in. This is part of Bashir's kind of naivete, right? He's he's just thinking that everyone would just do the right thing. But no, they're not going to do the right thing. They're going to
Yeah.
do according to their own self-interests.
And if I can remember correctly from that episode, uh, what makes this even more scary is that the quickening, as far as I can remember, does not have a cure.
Hmm.
So the fact that Koval and the head of the Tal Shiar wants to know about a virus that they can utilize potentially as a bioweapon that doesn't have a
Yeah.
cure on a population is very frightening. And so what they're doing is, and what I love about the writing here that Ron Moore is doing is they're setting up Koval to be this real bad, nasty character. And in the end, though, he ends up being a mole for Section 31 within the Romulan government because Sloan even mentions, I believe, at the end of the episode that Koval has been feeding. No, is it
Hmm.
maybe
Yeah.
it's Admiral Ross? Is it Ross or
Yeah.
Sloan?
Maybe Ross. Yeah.
Maybe Russ. One of
Admiral.
them says
Yeah.
that Koval has been feeding the Federation information for years.
Yeah.
So they paint this guy out to be this real awful guy, a real nasty guy. I mean, you kind of would expect that of the head of Tal Shiar. And then he's actually the one who's been doing good things. And I do like the fact that Bashir calls them out on, calls Admiral Ross on the fact that they hung Kreetak out to dry, that he
Yeah.
didn't think that was right.
Yeah.
And so this is that the war of Bashir's views of doing right and doing things the right way, and this moral compass to what Section 31 does, is which is this they the means in which they do things, they can justify it, but they're not usually good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And you see on Admiral Ross's face that he doesn't necessarily like it. I mean, he doesn't like it, but he kind of has to accept what Section 31 is doing for in their perception, in their view, for the greater good of the
Yeah.
Federation, for the greater good of the outcome of the war.
So uh, let's talk about that for a second, Chris, if you don't mind. Let's talk about this idea that Section 31 believes what they are doing is for the betterment of the Federation, protection of the Federation, right? They're talking about protecting the Federation from threats. We discussed this somewhat in depth in our last episode, Inquisition. Here's my question. Put yourself in Sloan's shoes for a second. Don't think about the moral compasses or the end justify the means or any of that. Do you think that the protection of the Federation and the protection of paradise, as we discussed in the previous episode, is so important that the way in which you go about ensuring that protection outweighs the end means?
That isn't that's the
Think about this, Chris. Put your family in the Federation, and there's threats out there to the Federation, and your family's part of the Federation. Does that mean that you will do whatever is necessary for that protection, even if that means doing things that aren't necessarily copacetic with what the Federation stands for?
yeah.
Because I think that's what how Sloan looks at it. We don't know at this point if Sloan has a family or not, but I kind of feel like maybe he does, because otherwise, I don't know. I just feel like if you have a family, I feel like that would drive you a heck of a lot more than if you're just you by yourself doing a job, a mission.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's the essence of the episode, right? And to the title, Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis, right? Like you said, for among arms the laws are silent. So in a universe where not everyone holds the same ethical standard of goodness as you and are willing to do morally ambiguous or unethical actions to harm you, to hurt you, your family, your organization, your federation, right? How do you protect against that when all of the idealistic or honorable actions that you can do are vulnerable to um, immoral actions? You know, how do you protect against that? So I think that's the good kind of essence um, of this like episode. And I think you have to what the Federation is doing is realizing that it has to arm itself with in the environment it's in, it has to arm itself with enough formidable kind of aspects where um, it can protect itself like from like immoral actions. And when you're dealing with an existential like threat like to your existence, right? Then like this says, for among arms the laws are silent. When the Federation is threatened with existential like crisis, then it must do what it must do to protect itself. Otherwise, it's gone. Now, I'm not saying like I'm not sure what um thinking through this. What is the ultimate like right action is kind of up to different like perspectives.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we know that Bashir very much sees, I think, the universe as black and white. Sloan sees it as very, very gray, lots of shades of gray. I don't know. This is probably me again, grasping at straws here. But when Bashir and Garrick are having that discussion, and Garrick mentions how everything in Romulus is gray, right? Everything's gray.
oh
Even the
yeah.
heart, even their heart is gray. It makes me think back to the idea of shades of gray and the way in which the universe is being viewed. I think Sloan very much looks at there are many, countless shades of gray. Bashir, I think, sees things very much black and white.
You know, that analogy of gray like is really really great too because what it makes me think of is if you think of um yin and yang or black and white and together, right? And this idea that there's light, that there's idea that there's dark, and the light represents something and the dark represents something, but you have to have both of them together, like operating for there to be harmonious like existence. You can't have like one like without the other.
Yeah,
Um, that's not to say that there isn't like there's ethical action and there's non like ethical action,
for
but in
sure.
here, I thought what Garrick says, yeah, everything on Romulus is gray. It's actually probably a lot of thinking about Ron D. Moore and him writing it. There's probably a lot of symbolism like in there as he wrote that. So,
And that whole idea of black and white versus different layers of gray, that was a huge reminder to me of BSG and
yeah.
the approach that Ron Moore took, right? Because there's an incredible amount of symbolism and metaphors across BSG, right?
Hmm.
And I think that we see a fair amount of that so far in these first two episodes of Section 31. Um,
Yeah.
that interaction between Bashir and Admiral Ross, I love the line that Bashir uses because he's calling out this idea of what Section 31 is doing,
Hmm.
right? And he says, "Is this what we have become? A 24th century Rome driven by nothing other than the certainty that Caesar can do no wrong." Um, and he's basically calling Section 31 Caesar, right? He's saying that can Section 31 do no wrong? Can we do no wrong?
Hmm.
What are we becoming? And the idea of, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And is the Federation really is does it really uphold the standards and the principles and the values that it claims it does? Because if you remember uh, the interaction where Bashir goes into Cisco's office and they're having that conversation before he leaves for the conference, of course. And Cisco mentions that the some higher ups basically refuse to confirm or deny anything, and he believes that way way high up in the Federation, this is being, you know, it's basically hands off, right? They're kind of looking the other way
Yeah.
because they know that they can't confirm it because the things that Section 31 does would be in violation of those principles and things that they're trying to uphold. But
Yeah.
they also know that without Section 31 doing the things that it does, there may be no principles and things to uphold because there may be no federation, at least maybe in their eyes.
Yeah. And there actually would not be a federation and there would not be an alliance without what Cisco did that he describes in A Pale Moonlight, right? Because the alliance itself is fundamentally based on a lie.
You're 100% right on
You know,
that.
so like when you think was bringing the Romulans in to this conflict with the Dominion the right thing to do? Well, it was absolutely the necessary thing to do,
Yeah.
to make sure that the Alpha Quadrant like could survive. Like
This
it
is about
like it's
saving
all.
lives, right?
Hmm.
That's all this was about, was saving lives. Well, maybe that's not the only thing, but the one of the big reasons, right? As we're talking about this, it makes me think, and I'm sure you've seen this movie before. It's a classic movie many people have called A Few Good Men. And in A Few Good Men, have you seen it before?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it
okay.
made me think about which movie
Okay.
I was thinking about. Yeah, the Jack Nicholson movie, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And in A Few Good Men, there are many moments where Jack Nicholson's character describes the fact that what they're doing, while grotesque and, against what Lieutenant Caffey believes, he says, saves lives. That his justification for the means in which they go about doing things may not jive with everybody, but at the end of the day, it saves lives. And I love that whole spiel that he does in the courtroom scene where he mentions this idea about, we live in a world where there's walls and we need men on those walls and so, blah blah blah. And obviously I doubt there's any connection between that movie and this DS9 episode, but it makes me think of this idea that sometimes people will go and break their rules and their principles and everything because they believe that what they are doing ultimately is important in order to get to said means or
yeah,
to get to said
yeah,
ends, right? Again,
yeah.
this idea of the ends justify the means is going to be an underlying theme, I think, throughout all these Section 31 episodes.
Yeah, they absolutely will. Um, and I would say like, you talked about a Few Good Men, right? I said the name of the movie, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, but Jack Nicholson's character is a commanding officer, I believe, in that
Yep.
one.
Of
Yeah,
Guantanamo
yeah, and so's Admiral
or
Ross.
Gitmo. Yeah, Gitmo.
Yeah, so's Admiral Ross, right?
Yeah.
So as they have advanced through the ranks in their service, and as they are now commanding officers, having to like they sent they sent their officers out to do what had to be done, and I'm sure they realized so many of them died. Um, that changes kind of their perception and their ideas of what was the right thing to do, and
Yeah.
kind of their viewpoint of the world or the galaxy. So I think that's just like a really like fascinating thing to do. You see that like in Ross, Admiral Ross. I really think, at least what I've seen of him, I really think is a man who believes in the principles of the Federation. He really, really does. But then he's got this side where he's like, okay, I'm gonna take off my comm badge. This is all off the record, and yeah, you guys are absolutely necessary, and you got to do it. And I know this has to be done, um, but I want to know as minimal. I want to. He obviously Admiral Ross knows about the operations, but he doesn't want to know everything. Um, so he still has some deniability there,
Yeah.
and is
Plausible deniability.
plausible deniability.
Unfortunately, denial is not just a river in Egypt, is it?
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's pretty cool like to see that. I wonder, like just thinking through these admirals that we talk about, like, Admiral Ross. I mean, Admiral Nechayev, maybe she would have a similar viewpoint like that Admiral Ross like does. I don't know.
I mean, when her and Picard go to war over, metaphorically speaking, go
Yeah.
to war over the utilization of Hugh, right? And the
Yeah.
fact that Hugh was not utilized to reap the federation of a mortal enemy, in this case, the Borg. And I think that's pretty close to the direct quote from Admiral Nechayev. She believes that was a huge foul on Picard's part,
Hmm.
and Picard sees it very differently,
Yeah.
right? He sees it as a moral and ethical decision that he made, that he could not take this individual because Hughes showed him that he is an individual and not just a brainless automaton. That he saw it very differently and took action differently. Um, it made me think, Chris, what a fun spotlight series it would be to go
Yeah.
through and do the episodes of the different admirals and
Oh
compare
yeah.
yeah, right?
Yeah,
Like
right?
you'd
Yeah.
have one for for Admiral Preston, you'd have one for
Hmm.
Admiral Jellicoe, you'd have one for the episodes with Nechayev, Admiral Ross. I mean, there's a few of these admirals and comparing and contrasting like their leadership philosophies, like their morals and principles. And you think about it, like these episodes that these admirals are in, there are some very, very real moral decisions to be made with Pressman, for example, and this idea of the technology where they could, instantaneously jump, almost like Discovery, which
Yeah.
we won't talk about. And they kill all those people right in the ship. They find the Pegasus in the asteroid,
Yeah.
and then you have Jellicoe and his leadership style taking over the Enterprise while Kirk's on that secret mission. And he's captured by the Cardassians,
Or
right? That's the whole.
Picard on the secret mission. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the whole like there are four lights
Yeah, there are four
episode.
lights. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a two-parter, I believe. But wouldn't it be fun to like look at the admirals and be like, okay, which one's the biggest dirtbag of all of them? Which one
Yeah.
is actually because we talked about this with Natalia about that Nechayev had a really good point many times when it came to Picard and everything. But anyways,
Yeah,
sidetrack
that's
story. That
great.
would be a fun like the Admiral Spotlight series would be really fun. And actually, even the Admiral in Insurrection, right? The one
Yeah.
who's breaking the whole forced relocation of the Baku.
Hmm.
And I mean, yeah, oh gosh, that could be fun. That could actually be really fun.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lot of TNG admirals in there, I think, that would be fun to discuss.
Totally.
Yeah. But anyway, so it's true though. I think it's almost like you have this senior leadership in the Federation who I think is fully on board with Section 31, but like you said, they want plausible deniability because they don't want to get their hands dirty. They
Yeah.
believe that the dirty work has to be done, but they're going to let somebody else do it and they're going to wash their hands of it and not be involved because they don't want to break their own moral principles and codes. They'll just let somebody else do that for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
And I do
So
think Admiral Ross is legitimately a good guy. I think he's a good admiral. We see that throughout the series that he's in,
yeah.
the episodes he's in. But I do think there is a misstep here getting himself involved with Section 31.
Yeah, it's possible. Maybe there is a misstep.
Or maybe there isn't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's talk through that a little bit actually, right? I mean, Admiral Ross, like obviously he knew like Sloan was in Section 31 and on the Bellerophon. So like you had these very in terms of people of importance, you had Admiral Ross and Sloan, head of Section 31, on this mission. That's how important this mission was, right? To keep Kratok from going on the continuum, on the committee, on the continuum
Yeah.
committee.
Yeah.
Um, so they both believed strongly in it, I I feel. And I'm almost feeling like maybe it was a good decision. Like Admiral Ross um letting Section 1 like do the thing that it did and supporting, I mean he supported Section 31. Like it was a supportive decision to keep the Romulans like as allies.
Yeah. Uh, I think part of this mission too, I'm hearing thunder, big time thunder
Oh,
behind me.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're having
Oh,
another storm
whoa.
coming in. I do think that part of this mission, besides just keeping Senator Kretak out of this delegation or whatever,
Yeah.
I do think it was also about keeping Koval from being exposed in some way,
Yes.
right? I
Yes.
do think
Yeah.
that was an
Yeah.
element of that, right? Because if Koval gets exposed, they lose a massive, massive intelligence source within the Romulan Empire. And we're not talking about just some rando Romulan soldier or Romulan officer. This is the head of the Tal Shiar. I mean, you think about I'm curious, and I don't think it was mentioned in this episode, and I don't think it's mentioned in any other episode. I want to know what happened. Like, what did it take to get Koval, This guy who's risen up to this position as the head of the Tal Shiar
Hmm.
to all of a sudden be working with Section 31 and the Federation to provide intel on his own people. I don't remember if that's said in a later episode or not, but that's a huge, huge deal. I mean, that's like getting the head of the Obsidian Order
Yeah.
to provide intel. That's no small feat. I don't remember if it's Koval that comes to them or they recruit Koval or what it is, but that's a huge, huge deal that we cannot overlook.
Yeah, absolutely is a huge deal. And actually that'd be a pretty cool story to explore, like
Hmm.
in its own episode or short story or story. That'd be really cool to
Yeah.
explore.
Also, the actor that plays Koval is none other than John Fleck, who plays the head Suliban in Enterprise.
Oh, okay.
Same actor. He also played another.
Ah,
He
yeah.
also played another Romulan in TNG, I believe, as well.
That's the voice sounded so familiar.
Yes, that is the one and only John Fleck, who's a
Yeah.
fantastic actor and played a number of great characters. But yeah, that it would be interesting to explore that and have an episode just where you see like Koval
Hmm.
initially, whatever leads up to that decision of him to basically betray his people in a certain instance, right?
Hmm.
Like, and be able to maybe it's like a two-parter, right? Where he's doing this and he's having to be so secretive that he's providing this information without being caught. I mean, I know he's
Hmm.
ahead of the Tal Shiar, but even the Tal Shiar would probably be monitoring him and being like, yeah, they monitor everybody, right? I mean, there's a quote about that Garrick mentions about how like you can't even sit down to dinner without the Obsidian Order basically approving what you're going to have for dinner. I'm pretty sure the Tal Shiar would be something very similar to that in the Romulan Empire.
Yeah, I agree. They're gonna be watching all for the people that are watching all of the different steps that they're making throughout the day. And if you're in the Tal Shiar, like I'm sure they're watching you all the time.
Yeah, even the head of the Tal Shiar, just because you're the head of it doesn't mean that they're gonna just take hands off or anything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about Bashir again at the end of the episode. This is after Sloan like leaves the office or his quarters, excuse me. This is
Yeah.
after Sloan leaves his quarters. And Bashir like calls Odo security because I think he wants to turn like Sloan in. And then he gives a pause and he goes, "Oh, never mind. Like my mistake." That was an important like moment for Bashir. I think, he's conflicted. He's not sure. He doesn't know what the right thing to do uh is at the moment. Like any of us, like you, I think we're both like this is such a great episode. Like you don't know what the right thing to do is at
Yeah.
the moment. So,
I think this episode, like Inquisition, and I think this is going to be this way moving forward. It's complex. It's more complex than it appears on the surface, right? And I'm glad you brought up that end scene
mhm.
with Bashir because to me, this moment makes me think that after what Bashir has been through, mind you, Bashir got beat up by the Tal Shiar during his little interrogation and questioning they did to him, right? Um, this makes me think that Bashir may be starting to realize that the world and the universe isn't as black and white as he thought it was. That maybe that is more gray, and that maybe, just maybe, there are things that have to be done that he may not agree with, but do serve a purpose, whether he likes the way in which those things are done. So, in order, Section 31. And by him not reporting anything to Odo, almost makes me feel like he is uh accepting a little bit, maybe just the smallest, tiniest amount
Yeah.
of what it is that Section 31 may do, even if he doesn't
Yeah.
agree with it.
Yeah, that's right. Bashir is a man that like he still has his teddy bear, right? So
Hey, I still have a teddy bear from the first grade. Thank you very much.
yeah,
Even though my daughter has it now, but yes, he does.
likewise, I have nice stuffed animals. So, but he is a man like they bring that that teddy bear is also a symbol because that is a symbol of his kind of, Bashir's eternal optimism, as Garrick would say, his naivete, um, and him and his believing that everyone's gonna try and do like the right thing. Um, so there's that.
Mhm.
But Bashir himself, you know, it's not his fault that he was genetically enhanced. That's not his fault. He was
Yeah,
born.
no, his parents did that.
Yeah, his parents did
Yeah.
that, right? Um, but he had to lie on his entrance exam into Starfleet Medical. So that was a thing that he's carried like in his mind and in his heart and his
Yeah.
spirit for that long time. So he's having to deal with those very kind of different things. And he's probably not able to really like synthesize them like together either. So him going through this with Section 31 um is actually um Bashir in parallel going through this in his mind is how do I reconcile these things? I want to be a doctor to help people to bring good into this world, but part of my life is based on a lie, but that wasn't my fault. I still want to do all these kind of good things, but the reason I am so exceptional at what I can do is because I've got these like genetic enhancements and because there was a lie, I was able to get into Starfleet Medical and learn everything I was able to learn. And here he is as a person, and he's not one of those other genetically enhanced human beings that are kind of like they're in their own um kind of institute. They're kind of segregated off from society. But Bashir's not like that.
Yeah.
He's totally in um Starfleet where he can do the most benefit. And so he's reconciling that as like a human being. Um, so I think this is kind of cool to explore with Section 31 going, okay, Section 31, oh my gosh, they do all this duplicative actions that are bad, morally ambiguous. There's lies, but because of them, the Federation still exists. And so he's struggling with that too.
Uh, yeah, those are all good points. I think Section 31, from what we've seen these first two episodes, I think it's changing Bashir a little bit. I
Hmm.
really do. I think it's forcing him to struggle, as you've just mentioned, internally with these issues and things that have happened in the past. Some outside of his control, some things he did intentionally, like lying on his entrance paperwork and so forth. And I also think it's causing Bashir to begin to see subtle shade, maybe not even subtle, just shades of gray that he didn't see before.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for his development as a character, right? I think he can still have his morals and values and principles, but begin to see things and begin to see the universe the way that Garrick maybe sees it a little bit more. And the way Sloan maybe sees it a little bit more, but still holding close to those values and principles. And I think that's important for him moving forward as a character.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Garrick, and so what I would love to see in this episode, it wasn't time really to allow for it though, but what I would have loved to see is a bookend of an interaction with Bashir and Garrick.
Oh yeah, like after he went through this
Yeah,
and then them having another conversation.
yeah,
That's a really good point.
yeah. No time. I mean,
Yeah,
but
the episode would have been a lot longer then if that was the
yeah,
case, but
but I think like that cool kind of bookend because Bashir he really likes Garrick and
yeah.
you know is coming around to seeing a little bit how Garrick sees the world, how
Maybe
he
they could have
sees
cut out
things.
that Romulan ale drinking scene.
Yeah,
It was a funny
totally.
scene. It was a lighthearted scene for sure. But maybe cut that out and then put in something at the end with Garrick. That would have been
Hmm.
because there's a couple episodes like that where he interacts with Garrick at the beginning and interacts with him again at the end. Um, so Garrick's went through a lot. I mean, we're in season 7 now, right? So
Yeah.
we've already had the story arc with Anabrantane, who was at one point the head of the Obsidian Order, and then turns out was actually Garrick's father and mentor and all this other stuff. And we went through all of that story arc about them trying to attack the Romulans, or I'm sorry, you going with the Romulans to attack the Dominion, near their where they thought was the home world, and then they're just the whole fleet's decimated and yada yada yada, right? And Garrick was of course part of the Obsidian Order, and was part of the Cardassian Union during the occupation and so forth.
Hmm.
And he sees things very differently because of life experiences and decisions and choices. And so does Bashir because of much different life and experiences and choices. And I think looking at this, it reminds me that our experiences in life and the choices we make help to shape who we become. And we are starting to see that section 31, I think, in the first 2 episodes. And let me know if you agree or disagree with this, Chris, that section 31 is beginning to have an effect on Bashir and beginning to shape him a little bit. Maybe not a ton yet, but a little bit.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree that it does. Yeah, this
And,
is. Go ahead. Yeah.
no, I was just saying it's been fascinating these first 2 episodes to watch some of this start to evolve and start to see section 31 evolve a little bit, and we're going to see more of that moving forward. Of course, when we jump to Enterprise, we'll be technically going back in time and seeing
Hmm.
section 31 at an earlier point, but that will help connect the pieces and the dots to see where section 31 came from in the 21 mid 2100s to the late 2300s.
Yeah, it will. Sloan, I think, is the perfect character to introduce us to a Section 31. He
Agree.
he does a
Yeah.
great job there.
Yeah, and like I said, William Sadler was really the perfect choice for this role.
Yeah. Yeah, he absolutely was.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, this has been great, Chris. It's been fascinating. Another incredible Section 31 episode for those of you watching or listening. Let us know what you think in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or send us a message if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform or checking us out on one of the social media platforms that we're on. Certainly another political intrigue episode, which would make sense coming from DS9. There's a lot of political intrigue throughout the DS9 series.
Yeah, I'm so glad I rewatched this episode, and so glad that I had, you know, got to see this with fresh eyes. And I mean, be, with the knowledge now, because we've seen BSG, because we know now that it was, well, we knew it was written by Ron D. Moore. And just thinking about BSG coming back, thinking about like this episode, and just kind of unveiling kind of the layers that I that are in it is just wonderful. Wonderful to do. I think we would encourage everyone to go back and take a look at this episode. It was really good.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're watching or listening to us, and maybe you're following along, maybe you watch our discussion, then you go back and watch the episode that we're mentioning in this spotlight episode. We hope that you are. This is an awesome opportunity as we do the spotlight series. 2 series ago, we did the Mirror Universe episodes, up at least in Legacy Trek, and we did the last spotlight series we did was the pilot episodes, and then we ranked them. So hopefully you got a chance to go back and watch all of those. Now we're doing section 31, and we hope you're watching along with us and providing your inputs and discussion to these episodes, because they're a lot of fun, and we have a number more still to go that are going to be a blast to talk about as well.
Absolutely. Looking forward to watching the next Section 31 episode, which like I don't remember anything about it. So it's gonna be like
That'll be
watching it
fresh.
new. Yep.
It's
Gonna
going to be
fresh.
certified fresh on Chris's Rotten Tomatoes.
Exactly.
For sure, yeah. So, well, hey, thank you everybody again so much as always for watching and listening to us all over the globe in the interwebs. We very much appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed this, and we hope you tune into our next Section 31 episode coming very, very soon to a theater or YouTube feed or podcast feed near you. We hope you enjoy it very much, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt Podcast.